Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to submit extraneous material into the record if so desired.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to open just to rise and to express my frustration and outrage with the Trump administration's reckless cuts to our Forest Service. The workforce that takes care of our forests, harvests timber, makes them resilient to wildfires, is treasured in my state of Washington, and I would say in the entire western United States. And cuts to this workforce endanger my constituents, endanger millions of Americans, and put our forests at high risk of catastrophic wildfires. I'm going to first yield to my colleague from California, George Whitesides, and I will hand you the floor for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you. Congressman Schrier, thank you. My name is George Whitesides, and I represent California's 27th Congressional District. Just 3 days after I was sworn into Congress to serve my first term this year, wildfires broke out across Southern California, forcing 200,000 people to evacuate, burning over 57,000 acres of land, damaging or destroying 18,000 homes, and taking the lives of 30 individuals. 2 weeks later, the Hughes Fire erupted in my own district near Castaic, right near where this picture behind me was taken. It forced over 30,000 people to evacuate. But compared to most, we were relatively lucky, given wind conditions and the brave work of our firefighters, many of whom were employed by the U.S. Forest Service. The fire was quickly contained. As Southern California began to emerge from the devastation and focus on rebuilding, firefighters and other fire service workers with the U.S. Forest Service were abruptly terminated by the Trump administration. Days or weeks after saving our lives, they were left out to dry with no explanation. One of these employees in my own district was Jasmine Dominguez, a GIS technician who literally mapped out the fires as they spread. I brought Jasmine as my guest to the State of the Union, where we talked about how difficult it would be for local fire chiefs to control the fires without the maps that she provided. Now we are preparing to go into another bad fire season. People are scared. If you look at the conditions on the ground in the American West, they are very concerning. Fire scientists are concerned. Firefighters are concerned. Between the January fires and the extreme dryness that we have experienced this winter, we are poised to experience earlier and more intense wildfires than before. The worst thing that we could do for our communities that have already suffered so much is to reduce our capacity to fight and contain these fires when, not if, they occur. The unconscionable and frankly offensive decision to terminate our Forest Service workers will make us less safe and more vulnerable to the natural disasters that we are guaranteed to experience. The administration may claim that firefighters were exempt from their cuts, but we know this is not true. I am in constant communication with federal wildfire community members, and here's what they tell me. Their grants have been frozen. Existing agreements with the federal government, frozen. Purchasing cards that they use to buy life-saving equipment, frozen. Hiring for fire season is often cyclical, meaning the Trump administration's earlier decision to freeze federal hiring left even our local fire stations understaffed and unprepared for the fire season that has already started. For the safety of the families and the individuals across all of our districts, and for the brave work that so many of these Forest Service employees do every day, we must speak out against these unfair terminations. And to every Forest Service worker who is laid off, and for everyone preparing to undergo even more of these so-called reductions in workforce, know that we hear you, We are with you, and we are fighting for you. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Whitesides. I would just like to echo some of those comments because I am also in the West, in Washington State, and we are seeing the risk of catastrophic wildfires increasing every year. And let me just first be clear, because all of this is being done under the guise of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, that we all want our tax dollars to be spent wisely. And let me also be clear that the people in the 8th District of Washington State think it is a super wise investment to invest in our Forest Service that will thin the forests, prevent catastrophic wildfires, and then fight catastrophic wildfires when they occur. So I would say, and my constituents would also say, because we all choke on smoke every summer, that this is not a time to cut the Forest Service. In fact, it is a time to hire up at the Forest Service, because we need them more than ever right now. We need them for fighting fires, as I discussed, for maintaining our forests, but also for supporting recreation, maintaining roads and trails, producing timber that we all need for affordable housing, for water restoration, watershed restoration, and for more. And, you know, we have heard from the administration that firefighters were exempt from the cuts. But here's the thing. About 75% of the people who were cut had firefighting training. In fact, they may have had different titles, but they had something called red cards, which meant they were ready, firefighting trained, and they leapt into action whenever wildland firefighters needed their help to work side by side with them. They're really indispensable employees. And I also want to say that the people that we're losing, many of them have had years of experience. They choose to work for the Forest Service, for the federal government, because of their passion for taking care of our public lands. They are talented, they are critical, they are experienced, and they choose to do this, frankly, for lower salaries, simply because they want to serve. These are civil servants. And now we're losing these really talented and critical staff through layoffs, and now the uncertainty, and we're seeing early retirements because, I mean, frankly, given the disrespect and the uncertainty, and now the impossible workload, can you imagine taking on all of the workload of your colleagues? Why would they stay? This is a very tough time to work for the federal government, especially in these dangerous jobs. I am so fortunate to represent Washington's 8th Congressional District. We have some of the most stunning nature in the country. In fact, we have the North Cascades National Park, we have Mount Rainier National Park, and we have 2 national forests stretching over 2 million acres. And that's a fifth of the national forest, approximately 10 million in Washington State. U.S. Forest Service manages these public lands. We also have agreements and rely on relationships between federal, state, and tribal organizations and governments to manage our public lands. So when you cut federal staffing, it really has ripple effects and leaves state, tribal, and local governments lacking. And so I just want to express that gratitude to U.S. Forest Service staff because they are also keeping our cherished public lands accessible for outdoor recreation. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, if you have ever been to Washington State, but if you had, you would know that outdoor recreation is our pride and joy and is what sustains us. Those beautiful springs and summers, that's what sustains us when we have the rainy fall and winter. We've already seen some of these outdoor trails, accesses closed. In fact, there's one called the Denny Creek Trailhead that's experienced closures due to these staffing shortages, and that's only going to be worse as we head into outdoor recreation season. And again, I have mentioned already the role that the Forest Service plays in wildfire mitigation. That is, thinning the forests, doing prescribed burns, doing the work that will prevent catastrophic wildfires. In my district, Fire Chief David Walker says the Forest Service is the primary firefighting force for something called the Lake Wenatchee area. It is a favorite vacation spot for Washington families. So when you gut the Forest Service's fire response operation, that means you're taking away public safety. You're taking away safety from the people who are camping in the Lake Wenatchee area. Mitigating risk in our forests has become ever more important with the increasing intensity of wildfires and the longer and longer wildfire season throughout the West. In our state, we used to see wildfire mostly in the dry part of the state, east of the Cascade Mountains. Now we see it in the entire state. We have seen devastating fires in recent years. In fact, 6 of the highest risk fire sheds in the entire country are in my district. So now is the time to strengthen our wildfire mitigation efforts, not kneecap the agency that is responsible for maintaining forest health. So firing support staff involved in wildfire response or mitigation does just as much harm as firing those that we think of as being on the front lines. They work together. I also just want to mention, imagine if you were a firefighter and you're depending on that support staff to tell you when the weather conditions change, when the winds are shifting, because that matters for your own survival as you are fighting these fires. The support staff is every bit as important. Now, we're anticipating there to be further staffing cuts right before wildfire season kicks into gear, and these reduction in force plans are being made with little forethought, no agency engagement. And so we're seeing, arbitrary firing of probationary employees in every agency and then struggling to rehire them because they've cut HR. This administration is not getting the message that every carpenter in my district knows: measure twice, cut once. Figure out where it makes sense to cut before making those cuts. This is not efficiency. This is actually the opposite. I also wanted to mention the role that the Forest Service plays in research. They research how to fight pestilence that weakens our trees. They research which varieties of trees will survive best in fire. They also do research into which of these fire-prone areas is the most at risk so that they can treat those areas first. I just want to emphasize how important these Forest Service employees are to our district and the entire West, and really, frankly, the entire country. I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about our Forest Service employees, some that I've spoken with since they were let go. But I first want to yield to my colleague, Andre Carson, for as much time as he may need to speak about the Forest Service cuts.
Thank you, Congresswoman Schrier. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your friendship. And thank you for being an advocate on behalf of your constituents. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to demand answers on the recent funding and staff cuts to the U.S. Forest Service. Last week, I led a letter to the administration urging a reversal of these short-sighted decisions. We are still waiting for a response. In my district, a wonderful nonpartisan organization called Keep Indianapolis Beautiful has helped people and nature thrive. They work with local government, businesses, community groups, and schools to plant trees, clean up litter, and transform vacant lots into vibrant community green spaces. Mr. Speaker, they work so hard. Their work makes our neighborhoods healthier, safer, and more connected. But this administration terminated grants that made this great work possible. It appears that DOGE has flagged words like equity and diversity in grant applications, even when it's biodiversity and tree equity. That's just not bureaucratic overreach, It's absurd. Tree equity is the idea that every neighborhood deserves trees. Without them, underserved areas become heat islands, trapping heat and raising energy bills, and degrading quality of life. This is not theory, it's science. Investing in greener, healthier neighborhoods benefits Hoosiers and Americans. These cuts undermine that very goal. I urge the USDA to reverse its course, and I call on our colleagues to join us in demanding the restoration of these critical investments in our communities. I yield back. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to tell you something about the town of Roslyn in my district. It's a small town completely surrounded by forest, and this forest is at high risk for catastrophic wildfire. In fact, it was incredibly important to the residents of the town not only to firewise their own homes, but to treat the forest around the city to protect it. I actually got to go out with nonprofits and Forest Service employees, use that drip torch myself, and participate in prescribed fire in order to work to make sure that this area would not go up in flames and threaten the entire city. And it's this sort of work that some of the employees in my district who were fired were doing. They were protecting homes, protecting lives, and after years in the service, were let go. I even have constituents, a husband and a wife, both worked for the U.S. Forest Service. They were both let go, and they both did that work and trail maintenance and protected people during snow season in snow parks. These are year-round jobs. They're family-sustaining jobs, and these are people without whom we all suffer. I want to tell you about another worker who was fired from my district. I'm actually working on harvesting timber. That timber is then sold and actually makes money for the federal government. But they were let go. I mean, that's not efficiency. It's definitely not saving taxpayer money. It's really beyond foolish, and it's emblematic of what this administration and Elon Musk have been doing. This is not government efficiency. It actually hampers the ability for the Forest Service to be efficient and to fulfill its mission. So taking a hatchet to these federal agencies across the board, labeling probationary employees as if they're in trouble for some reason, when really it just means they've been there devoting themselves to civil service for less than a year, that only causes harm, and it disparages them. That's why I was so proud to lead a letter with my Washington colleagues calling for Forest Service terminations to be rescinded and for the administration to halt any further cuts. This has disproportionately hit Washington State. I will continue fighting for the employees in my district, for the people in my district, for Washington State, to protect our forests, to fight these cuts, and to protect the U.S. Forest Service employees who have dedicated their lives to public service. I am now going to yield to my colleague from California, Dave Midd.
Thank you, Dr. Schrier. And Mr. Speaker, I rise today to urge the Trump administration to consider reversing its reckless and dangerous terminations of Forest Service employees. I represent an area in Orange County that is prone to the same types of wildfire risks that we saw devastate Los Angeles not too long ago. We're about a month or two away from fire season, and we have had a number of fires similar but smaller in scope to the one that just hit Los Angeles due to the Santa Ana winds that come through our area in Southern California every year, due to drier conditions because of climate change and droughts. And we know that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so we need to have these types of resources in place. As wildfires grow more and more intense, as the risks of wildfire become more and more ubiquitous, our firefighters are tired. They're understaffed, they're under-resourced, and underpaid. We need more funding to protect our communities from mega fires, but instead this administration is choosing to strip our key first responders in the U.S. Forest Service of resources that make us safe, that make millions of Americans, including the ones I represent in Orange County, safer. And let's be clear, if we're looking for efficiency, this is the opposite of efficiency. There's nothing efficient about firing essential public safety officials right before fire season. These are the people we deploy to try to clear the brush. They're the first responders who alert our forest fires, our fire departments of early onset wildfires before they become deadly multi-billion-dollar disasters. That's why we've rehired so many of the very same people that DOJ tried to fire in the first place due to the inefficiency, the gross incompetence of Elon Musk and the people that are working with him. This administration is also lying about retaining employees to help fight fires on the ground. Around 75% of those who were let go had firefighting experience, and now we're having to rehire some of them. This is what happens when you have 21-year-old hackers named Big Balls deciding how to cut our agencies as opposed to experts who know what they're doing. The incompetence of DOJ and Elon Musk is exposing Californians and millions of people around the country to unprecedented danger. We have to do something about it before it's too late. So I urge Congress to intervene, reverse these cuts, and stop this administration from putting more Americans in harm's way. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, we've all talked about thinning forests, making them more resilient. We've talked about the risk of catastrophic wildfire. I also wanted to mention that we passed a big infrastructure bill a couple years ago, and part of that was not just protecting roads and bridges, it was also protecting our natural infrastructure because of its connection with our urban areas and the wildland-urban interface and more. And that involved more management of our forests, more thinning of our forests. It required more hiring up of Forest Service staff, which really emphasizes the point my colleagues have made about how this is doing the exact opposite. I wanted to connect a couple other dots for you, just to really bring home this point. President Trump promised all along the campaign trail that he was going to bring down costs for the American people. These are costs at the grocery store. These are costs everywhere, really. We could talk about tariffs, but what I really want to focus on, that's a big issue in my district and my state, is the cost of housing. Young people today cannot afford to buy a house, and that means they are going to struggle to build their nest egg for retirement. Well, one of the ways to bring down the cost of housing is to use that 8-inch diameter or smaller timber that you bring out of those national forests, that the Forest Service brings out, mill those, turn it into cross-laminated timber, mass produce walls, roofs, the building materials that you need to build houses quickly and cheaply. You can do rezoning, permitting for land to use for housing, and then you can build houses quickly, starter houses, houses to just help young people get their piece of America, their safeguard for their retirement. But this is doing the opposite. If we're not bringing the wood out of our forests, like the firefighter, the Forest Service employee I just told you about who lost her job, then we don't have that cross-laminated timber. And now what's happening? We're going to rely on Canada for timber at what? 25% surcharge because of these tariffs. This is doing the opposite. It is not bringing costs down for American families. It is driving costs up to the tune of close to $4,000 per family across this country. This is damaging. And then you add on what's happening in the Forest Service, and it just drives up the cost of housing. So in closing, I want to first just extend my gratitude to the people who step up to serve our country, who work for the U.S. Forest Service, who protect our forests, protect our homes, protect us from choking on smoke all summer long and now stretching into other seasons. I want to emphasize that it is important to use tax dollars wisely and to have an efficient government. But sometimes that means hiring up instead of firing, and certainly indiscriminate firing is crazy, wrong-headed, and reckless. So I want to once again object to these indiscriminate cuts, and I will yield back. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the House now do adjourn.